Dear learners, welcome back. Today, let's discuss gender stereotypes in media. So, if we understand the term media, then definitely I'm sure you all know we are looking into those representations in advertisements, films, televisions, including OTT platforms, and so on. Gender stereotypes in media remain powerful mechanism through which patriarchal norms and even unequal gender relations are reproduced in everyday life, even as some progressive representations emerge in recent decades. Media industries such as advertising, film, and television construct taken for granted images of femininity and masculinity that shape how audiences understand what it means to be a woman or even a man, and what kinds of roles and behaviors are considered normal, desirable, or deviant. These representational patterns influence identity formation, aspirations, and interpersonal expectations, making critical engagement with media a central concern in gender studies. Now let's try to conceptualize gender stereotypes in media. So what it means by the word gender stereotypes? Gender stereotypes are socially shared, simplified beliefs about the traits, roles, and behaviors appropriate to women and men, often naturalized as common sense and embedded in institutional structures. In media contexts, these stereotypes work through familiar narrative templates and visual codes. For instance, the nurturing mother, the glamorous sex object in advertisements, the breadwinner, or even the aggressive hero, all these appear across different media genres and platforms. From a feminist perspective, these images are not neutral or natural reflections of reality, but discursive practices that legitimize gender hierarchies and also intersect with class, race, sexuality, and nationality to produce layered inequalities. Media representation does at least three key things. It prioritizes male visibility, confines women and men to traditional roles, and often normalizes asymmetrical power relations and even symbolic or physical violence, especially against women. Research shows that women remain underrepresented as speaking characters across multiple forms, while men and boys are positioned as the default subjects who makes decisions or even the narrators of stories. Even when representation becomes more diverse, women are frequently sexualized, depicted in decorative roles, or shown as struggling to juggle domestic and professional responsibilities in ways rarely applied to male characters. Gender stereotypes in advertising. When we look at advertising, it is a particularly dense site of gender stereotyping because of its repetitive exposure and its explicit connection to consumer desires, identities, and aspirations. Now, coming to print, television, and digital advertising, we find that men are disproportionately portrayed in professional leadership and expert roles, while women are associated with domestic labor, beauty, and care work, especially in societies marked by higher gender inequality. A comparative analysis of television advertising across 13 countries revealed that male characters are far more likely to be shown in positions of workplace authority, with women appearing in recreational or home-based roles, reinforcing the notion that public power belongs to men and domestic responsibility to women. Recent large-scale content analysis also highlighted persistent asymmetries in visibility and voice in advertising. One study reported that about 1/4 of advertisement featured only men on screen, whereas only a small proportion featured only women. And across ads, there were roughly twice as many male characters as female characters. Men receive around 3 times as much speaking time compared to women, signaling that male perspectives remain the normative narrative frame in commercial messages. Stereotypical portrayals include women as the queens of the house, cleaners, or even caregivers, and men as rational decision makers, technical experts, and economic providers, even when women's labor force participation has expanded in reality. Objectification and sexualization are central mechanisms of gender stereotyping in advertising. Numerous analyses indicate that women are much more likely than men to be depicted in revealing clothing, rated for physical attractiveness, or fragmented into sexualized body parts, especially in advertisements for fashion, alcohol, fragrances, and lifestyle products. Such representations align with what feminist scholars describe as the male gaze, in which female bodies are positioned as visual objects for heterosexual male pleasure rather than as autonomous subjects with agency. Systematic reviews further show that exposure to idealized hyper-feminine advertising images is associated with increased body dissatisfaction, self-objectification, and negative self-evaluation among women and girls, particularly in digital contexts where the frequency and intensity of exposure are high. At the same time, advertising has become a contested arena with audience, activists, and even regulators challenging sexist imagery and even demanding more inclusive and empowering representations. Research on audience responses reveal that sexist advertising tends to generate more negative attitudes towards brands, especially among women. Now, if we look at some emerging trends, often labeled femvertising, it attempts to subvert traditional stereotypes by depicting women in roles of professional competence, athletic strength, or political leadership, but the impact of such campaigns depends heavily on coherence between the message and corporate practices. Gender stereotypes in film. Film, as a storytelling medium, plays a major role in crystallizing and circulating gender norms by offering emotionally resonant narratives and glamorous images that audiences may emulate or sometimes even internalize. Content analysis of this mainstream cinema shows that women are consistently underrepresented in speaking roles, often constituting less than 1/3 of all characters in family films and popular movies, with even lower proportions in certain genres such as action and science fiction. Men dominate screen time, carry the negative arc, and occupy positions of agency, while women are frequently present as love interests, sidekicks, or just supporting figures whose storylines revolve around romance, sacrifice, and sometimes emotional. The qualitative texture of representation also reflects entrenched stereotypes. Women are disproportionately depicted as emotional, dependent, or sometimes even lacking ambition, who are confined to low-status jobs or domestic spaces, whereas men are framed as rational, competent, and oriented towards public achievements and adventure. When women appear in heroic roles, Their heroism is often tied to love, sexuality, or maternal instinct rather than to knowledge, strategy, or physical power, which remain associated with male protagonists. Social cognitive theory also suggests that such hyper-traditional portrayals of personality traits and abilities shape viewers' expectations of gender-appropriate behavior and can have subtle but long-lasting effects on how individuals perceive social reality. Sexualization is again a major axis of stereotyping in films. Studies report that female characters are more likely than male characters to be shown in sexualized attire, partially nude, or framed in ways that highlight bodily attractiveness, especially in youth-oriented and male-targeted genres. This pattern coexists with occupational disparities where men characters dominate prestigious and STEM-related occupations on screen and women are less frequently portrayed as scientists, engineers, political leaders, or even high-ranking professionals. The cumulative effect is to naturalize a gendered division of labor and to limit the imagined possibilities for women, particularly for young viewers who look to media for cues about future careers and social roles. Gender stereotypes in television. Now, if we look at television, this remains a more pervasive medium, especially through serial narratives that enter domestic spaces daily, making it a crucial site for the reproduction and contestation of gender norms. Again, when we review studies of contemporary television shows, this indicates that women, although more visible than in earlier decades, are still often cast in stereotypically feminine roles such as caregivers, romantic partners, or even sexual objects, while men occupy roles associated with leadership, problem solving, and public life. The recurrent themes in television representations are the underrepresentation of women relative to men, the reliance on narrow gender role templates, and the depiction of heterosexual relationships that normalize power imbalances and sometimes symbolic or even physical violence against women is shown. Audience research with adolescents suggests that viewers recognize the stereotypical nature of many television portrayals, but still internalize some of the norms regarding appearance, behavior, and relationship expectations. Female viewers in particular often experience tension between their awareness of sexism and the enjoyment of popular shows that sexualize or trivialize female characters, leading to calls for stronger regulation and more responsible content creation. In some regional television contexts, such as Indian soap operas and commercials, women continue to be positioned primarily as wives, mothers, and daughters-in-law, engaged in domestic negotiations, while men appear as economic providers and household heads, although niche programming has started to introduce more diverse character types. Television advertising mirrors and amplifies these patterns, frequently depicting women in domestic settings or as primary decision makers for household products while sidelining men from everyday care work and everyday domestic labor. Such imagery reinforces the assumption that home management is inherently feminine and the men's primary domain lies outside the household, despite empirical evidence of shifting family arrangements and women's extensive contribution to paid work. However, audience surveys show that many viewers, especially women, respond negatively to overtly stereotypical content, while substantial proportions reporting that they switch off or disengage from films or television programs when they feel misrepresented or demeaned. Emerging shifts and resistance. Despite the persistence of traditional stereotypes, there are notable shifts towards more inclusive, egalitarian representations across advertising, films, and television, driven by feminist activism, regulatory interventions, and market incentives that recognize diverse audiences. In advertising, campaigns that challenge restrictive beauty standards, celebrating diverse body types, or foreground women's professional achievements have gained visibility, although they coexist with more regressive messages and sometimes fall into just tokenism or performative branding. In film and television, increased attention to representation and industry initiatives to support women and non-binary creators have contributed to a gradual expansion of roles, storylines, and genres available to marginalized gender identities. The concept of media literacy has become central to resistance against harmful gender stereotypes. Educational programs and advocacy organizations encourage viewers to critically analyze media texts, identify patterns of objectification and inclusion, and question the ideologies encoded in seemingly natural or entertaining content. Research indicates that public support combined with the logic of market competition can push media producers towards more progressive portrayals, especially when audience reward content that offers nuanced, complex, and empowering images of women and men. At the same time, scholars caution that representation alone cannot dismantle structural inequalities, and it must be linked to broader struggles over labor, policy, and social norms. Coming to this session's case study, Gillette the Best Men. This can be a widely discussed example that illustrates contemporary tensions around gender stereotypes in media. In 2019, Gillette campaign titled The Best Men Can Be, which is a 2-minute advertisement that sought to address toxic masculinity and encouragement to challenge bullying, sexism, and harassment, is truly inspirational. The film juxtaposed scenes of boys fighting, men engaging in catcalling or dismissing women's concerns, and fathers intervening to model respectful behavior, accompanied by a voice-over that questioned whether traditional slogans about being the best a man can get had allowed harmful behaviors to persist too long. The campaign explicitly referenced to the Me Too movement and called on men to hold each other accountable, framing the shaving brand as aligned with a more responsible and caring model of masculinity. Audience reaction to this Gillette ad was sharply polarized, revealing the contested nature of gender representation in advertising. An analysis of around 9,200 online posts in the first 48 hours after the film's release found that the campaign generated roughly 64% negative buzz and 34% positive buzz, with a 37% of women expressing negative reactions. Many critics interpreted this ad as anti-male or even as unfairly generalizing that men are inherently toxic, while others perceived it as a necessary challenge to entrenched stereotypes that portray masculinity as synonymous with aggression, emotional stoicism, and dominance over women. The negative responses among some women were driven by a perception that the company was exploiting social justice discourse for profit without necessarily committing to deeper structural changes, highlighting the importance of perceived authenticity in femvertising and pro-equality campaigns. From a gender studies perspective, the Gillette case study demonstrates several important dynamics. First, it shows that advertising does not simply reproduce stereotypes but can also attempt to reframe them, promoting alternative models such as caring, accountable masculinity. However, such efforts inevitably intersect with corporate interests and risk being read as opportunistic. Second, the controversy illustrates how hegemonic masculinity is defended by some viewers as a threatened identity, with resistance to messages that question male privilege or even call for behavioral change, even when framed in moderate terms. Third, the case underscores the power of digital media environments to amplify and fragment audience responses, creating echo chambers where critics of feminist messages or celebrations of progressive portrayals circulate rapidly and shape the perceived success or failure of campaigns. The Gillette advertisement also invites reflection on how audiences interpret shifts in representational norms. While traditional advertising often centers women as objects of the male gaze, this campaign placed men's behavior under scrutiny, suggesting that being a good man involves rejecting harassment and modeling respectful conduct towards women and children. Some viewers even welcomed this repositioning as a break from reductive macho stereotypes and as an affirmation of ethical, caring masculinity, while others experienced it as a moralizing or accusatory gesture that undermined their sense of identity. The mixed reception reinforces that empowerment oriented or stereotype challenging advertising can have positive psychological effects when perceived as sincere and aligned with brand history, but many provoke backlash when audiences suspect superficial value signaling or perceive a misfit between the message and corporate practices. In teaching and research on gender stereotypes in media, the Gillette case can be used to prompt students to analyze the complex interplay between representation, audience interpretation, and commercial logic. This we can do by examining the visual and narrative strategies of the advertisement, the historical context of the brand's earlier representations of masculinity, and the online debates it sparked. Learners can explore how attempts to disrupt dominant gender scripts may both open new possibilities and even encounter significant resistance. This case also underlines that transforming gender norms in media requires not only changing images but also engaging with audience identities, power relations, and the economic structures that shape media production and even circulation. Thank you.